Ja, dus minder.
ಒಂದು ಡಿಸ್ಕನೆಕ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡಮ್ಮ. ಒಂದು ಕ್ಲಾಸ್ ಇದೆ ಇವಾಗ. ತಗೋ ಎತ್ಬಿಡು, ಎತ್ಬಿಡು ಬೇಗ.
of you who are I'll just put this on the group that the class is starting now. Okay, that's fine. Connect to this back. Back. Okay. But we can continue, or should I? Yeah. Should I continue? Yeah. But in between it disconnect. Yeah, I'm just waiting. Okay. No, no? Yeah. Okay. So for those of you who are not in India, you may be interested to know that from today that they're resuming normal international flights to the country. So those of you who have not been able to visit India now have the opportunity after 2 years of the pandemic. So welcome to Mayapur, those who would like to come ASAP. All right, okay. So today we're starting the last chapter of the Lilamrita of the first volume, which is the dream come true. Okay, let's, I'll just share screen. Screen share. Sharing it. Yeah, sure. Can you see it? Yeah. Okay. So this chapter deals with Srila Prabhupada publishing the Srimad Bhagavatam and also his voyage to the West. So we'll see in this chapter how Srila Prabhupada publishes the first 3 volumes of the first canto. That particular part we will deal with here in today's class, and in the next class we'll deal with Srila Prabhupada's going to the West. Okay, publishing Srimad Bhagavatam. So those of you who know Hanuman Prasad Poddar, those of you who have heard, he is the famous owner of the Gita Press in Gorakhpur. And he was the first person who donated for Srila Prabhupada to publish Srimad Bhagavatam. Writing was only half the battle. The other half was publishing. Both Bhaktivedanta Swami and his spiritual master wanted to see Srimad Bhagavatam printed in English and distributed widely. According to the teachings of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, the most modern methods of printing and distributing books should be used to spread Krishna consciousness. So which means that in the times that we are living in, the modern method is the e-book. So we should catch on to the e-book and also audiobooks. So these are becoming popular these days. So ISKCON is also adapting to it. And so we should also try to promote the e-books and the audiobooks, because there are a lot of people these days. Well, I can't say a lot, but there are a significant number of people who do not read, but they would prefer to hear audiobooks. And there are others who don't carry a book because they find carrying a book difficult. So they prefer to read something digitally. The most modern methods of printing and distributing books should be used to spread Krishna consciousness. Although many books of Vaishnava wisdom had already been perfectly presented by Rupa Goswami, Sanatan Goswami, and Jiva Goswami, the manuscripts now sat deteriorating in the Radha Damodar temple and other locations. And even the Gaudiya Math's printing of the Goswami's works were not being widely distributed. One of Bhaktivedanta Swami's godbrothers asked him why he was spending so much time and effort trying to make a new commentary on the Bhagavatam since so many great acharyas had already commented upon it. But in Bhaktivedanta Swami's mind, there was no question. His spiritual master had given him an order. This is Prabhupada's consistent mood. So that he would often say that I just blindly followed what my Guru Maharaj instructed me. And the result is something wonderful, he would say. So whatever Srila Prabhupada's spiritual master ordered him, he had faith in that instruction. He just carried it out. Although rationally, these kind of arguments are presented by his god brothers, since there are so many commentaries, the great acharyas, why do you have to create a new commentary and things like that? There is no English commentary of the Bhagavatam. Srila Prabhupada's Bhagavatam commentary is the first English version of a Bhagavatam commentary in the Gaudiya Vaishnava line. The very first in the Gaudiya Vaishnava line. Okay. Commercial publishers, however, were not interested in the 60-volume Bhagavatam series, and Bhaktivedanta Swami was not interested in anything less than a 60-volume Parampara presentation of verses, synonyms, and purports based on the commentaries of the previous acharyas. But to publish such books, he would have to raise private donations and publish at his own expense. Radha Damodar temple may have been the best place for writing Srimad Bhagavatam, but not for printing and publishing it. For that, he would have to go to New Delhi. Among his Delhi contacts, Bhaktivedanta Swami considered Hitasaran Sharma a likely helper. Although he had stayed in Mr. Sharma's home, Mr. Sharma had appreciated him more as a member of a genre than as an individual. At least, Mr. Sharma was inclined to help sadhus, and he recognized Bhaktivedanta Swami as a genuinely religious person. Therefore, when Bhaktivedanta Swami approached him in his office, he was willing to help, considering it a religious duty to propagate Srimad Bhagavatam. Hitasaran Sharma was qualified to help for two reasons. Now, if you notice how Prabhupada was trying to push his Bhagavatam or push his efforts, he was not looking at someone who would fully be convinced about his mission and help him fully. He was willing to take any help from whoever could help in whatever way. That's Prabhupada's glory. Even when he established the Krishna consciousness movement, he was willing to accept any help anyone could offer to help him in this Krishna consciousness movement. Hitasaran Sharma was qualified to help for two reasons. He was the secretary to J.D. Dalmia, a wealthy philanthropist, and he was the owner of a commercial printing works, Radha Press. According to Mr. Sharma, Mr. Dalmia would not directly give money to Bhaktivedanta Swami, even if his secretary suggested it. Mr. Sharma therefore advised Bhaktivedanta Swami to go to Gorakhpur and show his manuscript to Hanuman Prasad Poddar, a religious publisher. Accepting this as good advice, Bhaktivedanta Swami journeyed to Gorakhpur, some 475 miles from Delhi. Even such a trip as this constituted a financial strain. Bhaktivedanta Swami's daily ledger showed a balance of 130 rupees as of August 8, 1962, the day he started for Gorakhpur. By the time he reached Lucknow is on the way to Gorakhpur, he was down to 57 rupees. Travel from Lucknow to Gorakhpur cost another 6 rupees. And the rickshaw to Mr. Poddar's home cost 80 paise. So Prabhupada, this is something which he did throughout his life. He was very meticulous in his accounting. Not only was Srila Prabhupada meticulous in his accounting, but he was also very careful about how to use Krishna's energy. Sometimes there would be a paper on which something was written, and Prabhupada would not allow that paper to be thrown away. He would use that paper, the remaining, wherever you could write something, he would use that paper to write something. So Prabhupada was very careful about using Krishna's energy. This is the consciousness of a pure devotee. He doesn't like to waste even a small part of Krishna's energy. And one classic example, we'll see this later on in the Lilamrita. This will definitely come in the Lilamrita later on. But as a teaser, when Srila Prabhupada was in Mayapur, he would sometimes walk on the corridor of the Lotus building. You have these wide verandas there. And Prabhupada actually designed those verandas in such a manner that there would be a lot of breeze and devotees could use that to sleep. They're wide, much more than 7 feet. I think it's 10 feet or more. Anyway, so it's a very broad veranda. And Prabhupada built common toilets on either side. So the devotees who come to Mayapur, especially for the festivals and so on, could use that corridor to lie down and use the common toilets to take bath. So once when Srila Prabhupada is walking along this veranda beside his room on the middle floor of the Lotus building, he passed by one room and he noticed that the fan was running and the room was locked. So Prabhupada looked at it and he said, whoever has done this is a rascal. So I always remember this. If ever, I rarely forget to switch off the fan when leaving my room, but sometimes it has happened. So any time that I see a fan running in a room which has no people, especially if I do it, I think, oh, I'm a rascal. Prabhupada said we should not waste money. So there are some things which we should be conscious of if while we are, especially when I walk in Mayapur campus, if I see a tap running or dripping, somehow I get irresistibly drawn to go and close it. Yeah. And in fact, one of my friends has this kind of this thing of not wasting anything of Krishna's energy. He gets paranoid about it. Anyway, so Prabhupada was very meticulous. That is the consciousness of a pure devotee. That whether it is accounting or how to use Krishna's energy properly, meticulously. But the trip was well worth the cost. Bhaktivedanta Swami presented Mr. Poddar with his letter of introduction from Hitasharan Sharma and then showed him his manuscript. After briefly examining the manuscript, Mr. Poddar concluded it to be a highly developed work that should be supported. He agreed to send a donation of 4,000 rupees. This is not an ordinary amount of money in those days. 4,000 rupees, which would be roughly about $50 these days. But during those days, it is a large amount of money. He agreed to send a donation of 4,000 rupees to the Dalmia Trust in Delhi to be used towards the publication of Sri A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami's Srimad Bhagavatam. Okay. Now, usually what I do when I'm preparing for the class is that I don't take the whole of the Lilamrita and present it in the notes. I select portions. Sometimes large portions are there. But in this particular chapter, the whole narrative, the details are also interesting. It gives us a microscopic view of how Prabhupada navigated all these different things. So it's quite fascinating. Prabhupada, the pure devotee, working the details of the situation that he was in and the conditions under which he was working. So therefore, I just do not feel like omitting even a single sentence in this particular chapter so far. We'll see how it goes in the next part, in the next class. But so far in this class, but I've divided them into certain sections so that it's easier for comprehension. So Prabhupada now has received a donation from the kind Hanuman Prasad Poddar, and now he decides to go ahead with the printing. So Hitasharan Sharma owns the Radha Press. So why does he go from Radha Press to OK Press, and what is Chauri Bazaar all about? So let's look into that. Indian printers do not always require full payment before they begin a job, provided they receive a substantial advance payment. After the job is printed and bound, a customer who has not made the complete payment takes a portion of books commensurate to what he has paid, and after selling those books, he uses his profit to buy more. Bhaktivedanta Swami estimated that printing one volume would cost 7,000 rupees. So he was 3,000 short. He raised a few hundred rupees more by going door to door throughout Delhi. Then he went back to Radha Press and asked Hitacharan Sharma to begin. Mr. Sharma agreed. This is called taking risk for Krishna. Prabhupada often said this, right? Krishna will provide. He is the richest person. Even for an ordinary person, if you work, he'll give all facilities. So if you work for Krishna, why would he not give all facilities? So Prabhupada is confident that it can be printed. So Mr. Sharma agreed. Radha Press had already produced much of the first two chapters when Bhaktivedanta Swami objected that the type was not large enough. He wanted 12-point type, but the Radha Press had only 10-point. It's a font size. Those of you who are aware of printing and whatever, documenting things, or even on a Word, those who work with Word or any other document app would know that the standard is 12-point. 10 is readable, but it's a bit small. So Mr. Sharma agreed to take the work to another printer, Mr. Gautam Sharma of OK Press. So one Sharma to another Sharma of OK Press. In printing Bhaktivedanta Swami's volume 1 of the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, OK Press printed 4 book pages, twice on a side of one sheet of paper, 20 by 26 inches. Now, if you can visualize that, 26 by 20 and 4 pages, I mean, I'm a little bit familiar with printing, so I know what it means. But those of you who don't know what exactly it means, you can skip it. That's what they normally do. They print 4 pages twice on one side, one sheet of paper. This is not very uncommon. But before running the full 1100 copies, so that was the order that Prabhupada gave to print 1100 copies. They would print a proof which Bhaktivedanta Swami would read. Then following the corrected proofs, the printers would correct the handset type and run a second proof. A proof means that checking for errors, especially spelling errors, like when it is being typed, sometimes something may not appear on it. Different things can happen when things go to print. So then they give what is called a proof to check the spellings and other things, other errors that could occur, which Bhaktivedanta would also read. Sorry, then following the corrected proofs, the printers would correct the handset type and run a second proof, which Bhaktivedanta would also read. Usually you would also find errors in the second proof. If so, they would print a third proof. If he found no errors on the third proof, they would then print the final pages. At this pace, Bhaktivedanta Swami was able to order small quantities of paper as he could afford it, from 6 to 10 reams at a time, ordered 2 weeks in advance. Even as the volume was being printed, so there's first proof, once Prabhupada reads it and checks it, if there are errors, he would make corrections there. Then it would go for another print. It's not the full thing is printed, just a sample. And then that's called the second proof. And again, if there is a problem with the second proof, then they would print it again on a third proof. And usually by third proof, there is hardly an error. That's the system. I mean, otherwise it's poor job. Even after third proof, there are errors. So then after the third proof, usually they would print the final pages. Even as the volume was being printed, he was still writing the last chapters. When the proofs were ready at OK Press, he would pick up the proofs, return to his home at Chippivada, correct the proofs, and then return them. Sometimes 14-year-old Kantvedi, very fortunate boy, who lived at the Chippivada temple with his parents, would carry the proofs back and forth for the Swami. But in the last months of 1962, Bhaktivedanta Swami usually made a daily walk to OK Press. Now, this is interesting. You see the kind of territory that Prabhupada had to navigate to get this printing done. That's why I put this in here. Some of you are familiar with India, but this gives a very visually, very graphic. It's very, very well captured. His walk through the tight, crowded lanes of Chippiwada soon led him to a road close to the Jama Mosque. And that road led into the noisy, heavily trafficked Chavri Bazaar. The neighborhood is a busy paper district where laborers with ropes strapped across their shoulders pulled stout wooden carts heavily loaded with stacks of paper on small iron wheels. For 2 blocks, paper dealers were the only businesses. Hariram Gupta and Company, Roopchand and Sons, Bengal Paper Mill Company Limited, Universal Traders, Janata Paper Mart, one after another, even down the side alleys. Now, since this topic of paper has come up, you may, I don't know how many of you are aware of it or not, but in the last 6 to 8 months, there is a great crisis of paper across the whole world. I became aware of it because one of my good friends is at the BBT. And today I met another devotee who has a printing press. So I asked him, are you struggling for paper? He said, oh, I've never seen this in my entire career. 45 years I've been in this industry. But the world is going through a paper crisis at the current moment. Okay, that apart, let's go ahead. The neighborhood storefronts were colorful and disorderly. The neighborhood storefronts were colorful and disorderly. Pedestrian traffic was so hectic that for a person to dally, even for a moment, would cause a disruption. Carts and rickshaws carried paper and other goods back and forth through the streets. Sometimes a laborer would jog past with a hefty stack of pages on his head, the stack weighing down on either end. Traffic was swift, and an unmindful or slow-footed pedestrian risked being struck by a load protruding from the head of a bearer or from a passing cart. Occasionally, a man would be squatting on the roadside, smashing chunks of coal into small pieces to sell. Tiny corner smoke shops drew small gathering of customers for cigarettes or pan. The shopkeeper would rapidly spread the pan spices on a bit leaf, and the customer would walk off down the street, chewing the pan and spitting out red-stained saliva. It's not an uncommon sight in crowded parts of India, red-stained saliva on the roads. Amidst this milieu, as the Chowri Bazaar commercial district blended into tenement life and children played in the hazardous streets, Bhaktivedanta Swami was a gentle-looking yet determined figure. As he walked past the tenements, the tile sellers, the grain sellers, the sweet shops, and the printers, overhead would be electric wires, pigeons, and the clothesline from the tenement balconies. Finally, he would come to OK Press, directly across from a small mosque. He would come carrying the corrected proofs to anxiously oversee the printing work. Now, I just put this as a title. So just for us to remember that the first volume of Srimad Bhagavatam took 4 months to be printed. I'm not talking about the binding time, just the printing time. It took 4 months to be printed and 1,000 copies were printed. After 4 months, and when the whole book had been printed and the sheets were stacked on the floor of the press, Mr. Hitasharan Sharma arranged for the work to be moved to a bindery. The binding was done by an ancient operation, mostly by hand, and it took another month. So 4 months for printing, 1 month for binding. Bhaktivedanta Swami would come and observe the workers. A row of men sat in a small room surrounded by stacks of printed paper. The first man would take one of the large printed sheets, rapidly fold it twice, and pass it on to the next man who performed the next operation. The pages would be folded, stitched, and collated, then put into a vise and hammered together. before being trimmed on 3 sides with a handsaw and glued. Bit by bit, the book would be prepared for the final hard cover. In addition to his visits to OK Press and the bindery, Bhaktivedanta Swami would also occasionally travel by bus across the Yamuna River to Mr. Hitasharan Sharma's Radha Press. The Radha Press was printing 1,000 dust jackets for the volume. Now, this is a nice recollection by Hitasharan Sharma. Swamiji was going hither and thither. He was getting whatever collections he could and depositing them. And he was always mixing with many persons, going hither and thither. With me, he was very fond that I should do everything as soon as possible. He had a great haste. He used to say, time is going, quick, do it. He would be annoyed with me also, and he would have me to do his work first. But I was in the service of Dalmia, and I would tell him, your work has to be secondary for me. But he would say, now you have wasted my 2 days. What is this, Sharmaji? I'm coming here. I told you in the morning to do this, and you have not done it even now. But I would reply, I have got no time during the day. Then he would say, then you have wasted my complete day. So he was very much pressing me. This was his temperament. The binding was reddish, the color of an earthen brick, and was inlaid with gold lettering. Bhaktivedanta Swami had designed the jacket himself, and he had commissioned a young Bengali artist named Salit to execute it. It was a wraparound picture of the entire spiritual and material manifestations. Dominating the front cover was a pink lotus, and within its whole were Radha and Krishna and their pastimes in Vrindavan, along with Lord Caitanya chanting and dancing with his associates. From Krishna's lotus planet emanated yellow rays of light, and in that effulgence were many spiritual planets, appearing like so many suns. Sitting within each planet was a different four-armed form of Narayan, each with his name lettered beneath the planet. Trivikram, Keshava, Purushottama, and so on. Within an oval at the bottom of the front cover, Mahavishnu was exhaling the material universes. On the inside cover was Bhaktivedanta Swami's explanation of the cover illustration. When Umapati Maharaj was in ISKCON a few years ago, he would come home sometimes for prasadam. So during one such occasion, he told me that he liked this printing. He was part of the original group of devotees who joined Srila Prabhupada. So he was saying that with the dust jacket of the front first volume, so he was especially attracted to that spiritual world, that whole thing, and one particular area of that dust jacket. And then once he asked Prabhupada, I'm attracted to this planet. What is this planet in the spiritual world? Prabhupada looked at it and he said, oh, this is Mahavishnu exhaling the material universes. So it is referring to that part of the material creation. So he was saying, oh, I was attracted to the material world. Anyway, so let's go on. When the printing and the binding were completed, there were 1,100 copies. Bhaktivedanta Swami would receive 100 copies and the printer would keep the balance. From the sale of the 100 copies, Bhaktivedanta Swami would continue to pay off his debt to the printer and binder. Then he would receive another supply of books. This would continue until he had finished paying his debt. His plan was then to publish a second volume from the profits of the first and a third volume from the profits of the second. Kantvedi went to pick up the first 100 copies. He hired a man who put the books in large baskets, placed them on his hand truck, and then hauled them through the streets to the Chippivada temple, where Bhaktivedanta Swami stacked them in his room on a bench. Please give me a few minutes. It's very humid here and I just need to drink some water. Just replace it. Hare Krishna. Sorry, it took a while. The water is also warm. Okay, so after printing, so Prabhupada took up the task of selling Srimad Bhagavatam. Now, if you notice this whole thing, Srila Prabhupada did everything single-handedly. Although he had some assistants, but basically he was the prime mover. So from publishing to, he got donation for it, but then he had to proofread. He had to distribute it now. After all the printing, he has to also start distributing it. So single-handedly he was doing it. Selling Srimad Bhagavatam. Bhaktivedanta Swami went out alone to sell his books and present them to important people. Dr. Radhakrishnan, who gave him a personal audience, agreed to read the book and write his opinion. Hanuman Prasad Poddar was the first to write a favorable review. It was a great source of pleasure for me that a long-cherished dream has materialized and is going to be materialized with this and the would-be publications. I thank the Lord that due to His grace, this publication could see the light. Bhaktivedanta Swami went to the major libraries, universities and schools in India, where the librarians found him calm and quiet, noble, polite, scholarly, with a specific glow in him. Traveling on foot, he visited school administration offices throughout Delhi and placed copies in more than 40 schools in the Delhi area. The Ministry of Education, which had previously denied him assistance, placed an order for 50 copies for selected university and institutional libraries throughout India. This is the old India. Later on, that India changed and became secular India. So educational departments wouldn't order things like Srimad Bhagavatam. But during that time, it was possible, during Prabhupada's time. Placed an order for 50 copies of selected university and institutional libraries throughout India, the Ministry of Education. The ministry paid him 600 rupees plus packing and postage charges. And Bhaktivedanta Swami mailed the books to the designated libraries. The US Embassy purchased 18 copies to be distributed in America through the Library of Congress. The institutional sales were brisk, but then sales slowed. As the only agent, Bhaktivedanta Swami was now spending hours to just sell a few copies. He was eager to print a second volume, yet until enough money came from the first, he could not print. In the meantime, he continued translating and writing purports. Writing so many volumes is a huge task that would take many years, and at his present rate, with sales so slow, he would not be able to complete the work in his lifetime. Although there were many who took part in the production of the book and still others who became customers, only Bhaktivedanta Swami deeply experienced the successes and failures of the venture. It was his project and he was responsible. No one was eager to see him writing prolifically, and no one demanded that it be printed. Even when the sales slowed to a trickle, the managers of OK Press were not distressed. They would give him the balance of his books only when he paid for them. And since it was also he who had the burden of hiring OK Press to print a second volume, the pressure was on him to go out and sell as many copies of the first volume as possible. Look at the pressure the Prabhupada is working under. For Hanuman Prasad Poddar, the volume had been something to admire in passing. For Hitasaran Sharma, it had been something he had tended to after his day's work for Mr. Dalmia. For the boy who lived at Chippivada, Kantvedi, the book had meant a few errands. For the paper dealers, it had meant a small order. For Dr. Radhakrishnan, it had been but the slightest, soon forgotten matter in a life crammed with national politics and Hindu philosophizing. But Bhaktivedanta Swami, by his full engagement in producing the Bhagavatam, felt bliss and assurance that Krishna was pleased. He did not, however, intend for the Bhagavatam to be his private affair. It was the sorely needed medicine for the ills of Kali Yuga, and it was not possible for only one man to administer. If you notice, Prabhupada is personally pleased by the activity that he's doing for his Guru Maharaj. But he is not just, okay, I'm feeling happy, that's it. No, he knew that it was the sorely needed medicine for the ills of Kali Yuga, and it was not possible for only one man to administer it. Yet he was alone, and he felt exclusive pleasure and satisfaction in serving his Guru and Lord Krishna. Thus his transcendental frustration and pleasure mingled. His will strengthened, and he continued alone. His spiritual master, the previous spiritual masters, and the Vedic scriptures all assured him that he was right. If a person got a copy of the Bhagavatam and read even one page, he might decide to take part in Lord Chaitanya's movement. If a person seriously read the book, he would be convinced about spiritual life. The more this book would be distributed, the more the people could understand Krishna consciousness. And if they understood Krishna consciousness, they would become liberated from all problems. This is Prabhupada's continuous meditation, how to liberate everyone from all problems. Para dukkha dukhi. This was what Prabhupada is made of. How shall the whole world be happy? How shall we liberate the world, all the people of the world, from all their problems? Book selling was real preaching. Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati had wanted it. Even at the neglect of constructing temples or making followers, who could preach as well as Srimad Bhagavatam? Certainly, whoever spent 16 rupees for a book would also take the time to at least look at it. You're saying there's no sound? There's sound? You're able to hear? Hare Krishna? Okay. I think when we paused for water, I just noticed a chat message. Okay. Finally, after some hard work, Prabhupada began to get some favorable reviews. First, he got from Hanuman Prasad Poddar, definitely. So we can see further reviews. In the months that followed, Bhaktivedanta Swami received more favorable reviews. The prestigious Adayar Library Bulletin gave a full review, noting the editor's vast and deep study of the subject and concluding further volumes of this publication are eagerly awaited. Adayar is in Chennai. It's a very famous library, Adayar Library. So that's why it's saying the fake prestigious Adayar Library. Further volumes of this publication are eagerly awaited. His scholarly godbrothers also wrote their appreciations. Swami Bon Maharaj, rector of the Institute of Oriental Philosophy in Vrindavan, wrote, I have nothing but admiration for your bold and practical venture. If you should be able to complete the whole work, you will render a very great service to the cause of Prabhupada, Sri Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj, Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu, and the country also. Do it and rest assured there will be no scarcity of resources. Sorry, just went a little too fast. Bhaktisaranga Maharaj wrote a full review in his Sajjana Toshini. We expect that this particular English version of Srimad Bhagavatam will be widely read, and thereby spiritual poverty of people in general may be removed forever. At a time when we need it very greatly, Srimad Bhaktivedanta Swami has given us the right thing. We recommend this publication for everyone's serious study. Sri Bishwanath Das, Governor of Uttar Pradesh, commended the volume to all thoughtful people. An economic review praised the author for attempting a tremendous task. This is from Economic Review. At a time when not only the people of India, but those of the West need the chastening quality of love and truth in the corrupting atmosphere of hate and hypocrisy, a work like this will have uplifting and corrective influence. Doctors, see, if you notice this, we think, okay, we are living in very complicated times, but actually throughout history, Kali Yuga especially is filled with, always, if you look at this, what they're writing, they are like Economic Review, this is so many years ago, more than 50 years ago. The Economic Review is writing how the whole world is in need of chastening quality of love and truth, in the corrupting atmosphere of hate and hypocrisy. We think, oh, there's so much hate and hypocrisy today. Hate and hypocrisy has always been there. Of course, the magnitude may have increased a little bit, but the hate and hypocrisy, that inauspiciousness of hate and hypocrisy is a constant feature of life in the material world, especially in Kali Yuga. Dr. Zakir Hussain, Vice President of India, wrote, I have read your book, Srimad Bhagavatam, with great interest and much profit. I thank you again for the kind thought which must have prompted you to present it to me. The favorable reviews, although Bhaktivedanta Swami could not pay the printer with them, it's a very nice way of saying it, indicated a serious response. The book was valuable, and subsequent volumes would earn the series even more respect. By Krishna's grace, Bhaktivedanta Swami had already completed many of the translations and purports for volume 2. Even in the last weeks of printing the first volume, he had been writing day and night for the second volume. It was glorification of the Supreme Lord, Krishna, and therefore it required many, many volumes. He felt impelled to praise Krishna and describe him in more and more volumes. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had said that the presses of the world could not print fast enough the glories of Krishna and the spiritual world that were being received at every moment by pure devotees. Prabhupada calls it the transcendental television. So Krishna's pastimes are constantly telecast or webcast, as you may say it, or whatever cast into the heart of the pure devotees. So they're constantly seeing the pastimes of the Lord. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur would say that even if you take the entire printing press of the whole world, it could not print fast enough the glories of Krishna in the spiritual world that are being received at every moment by the pure devotees. So now what happens is that to concentrate on working on the volume 2, Srila Prabhupada decides to return back to Vrindavan to focus on his writing the second volume. Bhaktivedanta Swami decided to return to Vrindavan for several months of intensive writing on volume 2. This was his real business at Radha Damodar temple. Vrindavan was the best place for writing transcendental literature that had already been demonstrated by the Vaishnava Acharyas in the past. Living in simple ease, taking little rest and food, he continuously translated the verses and composed his Bhaktivedanta purports, volume 2. After a few months, after amassing enough manuscripts, he would return to Delhi and once again enter the world of publishing. In volume 1, he had covered the first 6.5 chapters of the first canto. The second volume began on page 365 with the 8th verse of the 7th chapter. Bhaktivedanta Swami wrote in his purport that the Srimad Bhagavatam was meant for Paramahamsas, persons engaged purely in self-realization. Yet he wrote, it works into the depth of the heart of those who may be worldly men. Worldly men are all engaged in the matter of sense gratification. But even such men also will find in this Vedic literature a remedial measure for their material diseases. This world is filled, every material pursuit is a disease. The people of this world are constantly, uninterruptedly, they're engaged in the pursuit of material desires, which means they're constantly sick. The world is filled with sick people, full of sick people, all kinds of material diseases they have. Now, that is the kind of world in which we are living. This is the vision of a pure devotee. So they know that the Bhagavatam is urgent. Prabhupada calls it the transcendental urge of the soul. It's urgent. So Prabhupada had that sense of urgency to print the Bhagavatam and to save the world, the people of the world, from all the calamities they were experiencing. Krishna is unlimited. It's possible to glorify Krishna unlimitedly. So that was Prabhupada's attempt, to glorify Krishna unlimitedly, so that the people of this world could get relief from their material disease. Bhaktivedanta Swami returned to Delhi to raise funds for printing volume 2. When he visited a prospective donor, he would show the man volume 1 and the growing collection of reviews, explaining that he was asking a donation, not to support himself, but to print this important literature. Although for the first volume he had received no donations equal to 4,000 rupees he had received from Mr. Poddar, an executive in the LNH sugar factory gave a donation of 5,000 rupees for volume 2. So this is how Krishna works. Prabhupada just goes on with his work and the money comes, because he's sincerely trying to execute the mission of his Guru Maharaj. Prabhupada is demonstrating that he's willing to undergo whatever hardship that is needed. He's willing to bite the bullet, as they say, or do whatever it takes. So Krishna is reciprocating. He's demonstrating through his pure devotee the mood of serving the mission of the Acharya. Do whatever it takes. So Prabhupada is personally in his life is demonstrating it. And you see here how Krishna, we can see here how Krishna is reciprocating. Whatever Prabhupada wants gets done, some or the other. Bhaktivedanta Swami had been dissatisfied with Hitasharan Sharma as a production supervisor. Although supposedly an expert in the trade, Hitasharan had caused delays, and sometimes he had advised Gautam Sharma of OK Press without consulting Bhaktivedanta Swami. The work on volume 1 had slowed and even stopped when a job from a cash customer had come up. And Bhaktivedanta, there is something called a cash customer and a credit customer. Prabhupada is a credit customer, right? Because they would print everything, but he would only pay in installments, and the remaining is credit. I mean, and he would clear the credit as and when. Credit means they already finished printing the books. A job, and even stopped when a job from a cash customer had come up. And Bhaktivedanta Swami had complained that it was Hitasharan's fault for not giving money to OK Press on time. For volume 2, Bhaktivedanta Swami decided to deal directly with OK Press and supervise the printing himself. He's taking more work because he wants to fulfill the urgent need. So even though it involves more complications for him, Prabhupada is willing to do anything just for the pleasure of his Guru Maharaj and do the right thing. He spoke to Gautam Sharma and offered a partial payment. Although the majority of the copies of volume 1 were still standing on their printing floor, Bhaktivedanta Swami wanted OK Press to begin volume 2. Gautam Sharma accepted the job. It is early in 1964 when volume 2 went to press, following the same steps as volume 1. But this time, Bhaktivedanta Swami was more actively present, pushing. To avoid delays, he purchased the paper himself at Siddomal and Sons, paper merchants, in the heart of the paper district. He would choose and order his paper and then arrange to transport it to OK Press. If the order was a large one, he would have it carried by cart. Smaller orders, he would send by rickshaw or on the head of a bearer. Now, Prabhupada is getting into every single detail so that he can do it quicker. He doesn't bother about the difficulty involved in it. So this is a very important section. We need to carefully take note of this. The consciousness of a pure devotee, although externally they may appear like common men, they are not. And this particular thing is very insightful. In his preface to the second volume, Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami expressed the apparent oddity of working in Delhi while living in Vrindavan. The path of fruitive, Prabhupada writes, the path of fruitive activities, that is, to say the path of earn money and enjoy life, as it is going on, generally appears to have become also our profession, although we have renounced the order of worldly life. They see that we are moving in the cities, in the government offices, banks and other business places for promoting the publication of Srimad Bhagavatam. They also see that we are moving in the press, paper market and amongst the bookbinders also away from our residence at Vrindavan. And thus they conclude sometimes mistakenly that we are also doing the same business in the dress of a mendicant. But actually, there is a gulf of difference between the two kinds of activities. This is not a business for maintaining an establishment for material enjoyment. On the contrary, it is an humble attempt to broadcast the glories of the Lord at a time when the people need it very badly. So Prabhupada is trying to very clearly clarify, this is not a business for maintaining the establishment of material enjoyment. Prabhupada is trying to show that everything that is coming out of it is going into printing and publishing and propagating. He is not using a single penny for his own life. He's not using a single penny for his own sense, so-called sense. Prabhupada anyway did not indulge in sense gratification. But he's trying to tell the people that not a single piece of it is going for sense gratification. He went on to describe how in former days, even 50 years ago, well-to-do members of society had commissioned panditas to print and handwrite the Bhagavatam and then distribute copies amongst the devotees and the general people. But times have changed. At the present moment, the time is so changed that we had to request one of the biggest industrialists of India to purchase 100 copies and distribute them. But the poor fellow expressed his inability. Now, notice this. The previous, they were patronized, right? The devotees. They would commission panditas, the wealthy members of society. They commit panditas to print, handwrite the Bhagavatam, distribute it. But times have changed. At the present moment, the time is so changed that we had to request one of the biggest industrialists of India to purchase 100. 100 is nothing for a wealthy man. Copies and distribute them, but the poor fellow expresses inability. We wish that someday somebody may come forward to pay for the actual cost of publication of the Srimad Bhagavatam and let them be distributed free to all the leading gentlemen of the world. But nobody is so far prepared to do this social uplifting work. This is Prabhupada's definition of social uplifting work. Printing Bhagavatam and spreading it, not other so-called what is referred to as social upliftment work. Prabhupada is a very clear idea. This is called social upliftment. After thanking the Ministry of Education and the Director of Education for distributing copies to institutions and libraries, Bhaktivedanta Swami again stated his predicament before his reading public. The problem is that we must get some money for completing the work, which is admittedly a mighty project. The sales proceeds are being employed in the promotional work and not in sense gratification. Herein lies the difference from the fruitive activities. And for all this, we have to approach everyone concerned, just like a businessman. There is no harm to become a businessman if it is done on the account of the Lord, as much as there is no harm to become a violent warrior like Arjuna or Hanumanji if such belligerent activities are executed to satisfy the desires of the Supreme Lord. Then Prabhupada writes, very nicely has captured the situation. So even though we are not in the Himalayas, even though we talk of business, even though we deal in rupees and paisa, still simply because we are 100% servants of the Lord and are engaged in the service of broadcasting the message of His glories, certainly we shall transcend and get through the invincible impasse of Maya. Look at that absolute conviction, absolute conviction. Certainly we shall transcend and go through the invincible impasse of Maya and reach the effulgent kingdom of God, render Him face-to-face eternal service in full bliss and knowledge. We are confident of this factual position, and we may also assure to our numerous readers that they will also achieve the same result simply by hearing the glories of the Lord. So Prabhupada is giving this confidence, that confidence which he had, he transmitted it to anyone who was willing to listen to him. The confidence that we shall certainly transcend and get through the invincible impasse of Maya. Absolute confidence. On receipt of the first copies of the second volume, another 400-page cloth-bound, brick-colored Srimad Bhagavatam with the same dust jacket as volume 1, Bhaktivedanta Swami made the rounds of the institutions, scholars, politicians, and booksellers. One Delhi bookseller, Dr. Manohar Lal Jain, had particular success in selling the volumes. So Manohar Lal Jain recollects. He would come to me for selling his books. He would come often, and he used to chat with me for 1 or 2 hours. How fortunate Mr. Manohar Lal Jain was. He had no other business except selling his books as much as possible. We would discuss the difficulties he was having and also many other things, yoga, Vedanta, and religious aspects of life. His problem was distributing his work because it is a big publication. He had planned to publish it in many volumes. Naturally, I told him it was not possible for any individual bookseller or publisher here to publish it and invest money in it. So that was a little bit of a disappointment for him because he could not bring out more volumes. But my sales were good because this was the best translation. Sanskrit text with English translations. No other such edition was available. I sold about 150 to 200 copies in about 2 to 3 years. The price was very little, only 16 rupees. He had published his reviews and he had a good sell, a good market. The price was reasonable and he was not interested in making money out of it. He was printing in English for the foreigners. He had a good command of Sanskrit as well as English. When we met, we would speak in English and his English was very impressive. He wanted me to publish, but I didn't have any presses and no finances. I told him he's only a bookseller, not that he had presses or he had big finances. I told him frankly, I would not be able to publish it because it is not 1 or 2 volumes, but many. But he managed somehow. I referred him to Atmaram and Sons. He also used to go there. He was a great master, philosopher, a great scholar. I used to enjoy the talks. He used to sit with me for 1 or 2 hours, as much as he could afford. Sometimes he would come in the morning, 11 or 12, and sometimes in the afternoon. He used to come in for money. How many copies are sold? So I would pay him. Practically, he was not doing very well with the finances at that time. He only wanted that his book should be sold to every library and everywhere where the people are interested in it. We used to publish a catalog every month and I would advertise his book. Orders would be coming from all over the world. So at least for me, the sales were picking up. If I sold 100 copies of the first volume, then I figured the second volume would be sold in the same number naturally. But definitely those who would take the first volume would also take volume 2 because it was institutional. and the institutions always try to complete their set. He used to discuss with me how the volumes can be brought out and how many it would take to complete the Srimad Bhagavatam. He was very much interested in bringing out the whole series. Then Prabhupada meets with another breakthrough, meeting with the heads of the state. He meets with the Prime Minister, and he also meets with the Vice President, Zakir Hussain. We saw earlier that Zakir Hussain had given a favorable review. Okay, here we go. In January of 1964, Bhaktivedanta Swami was granted an interview with Indian Vice President Zakir Hussain, who, although a Muslim, had written an appreciation of Bhaktivedanta Swami Srimad Bhagavatam. As Dr. Hussain cordially received the author at the presidential palace, Bhaktivedanta Swami spoke of the importance of Srimad Bhagavatam in the cause of love of Godhead. But Dr. Hussain wanted to know how love of Godhead could help humanity. The question put by ruler to Sadhu was filled with philosophical implications. But the Vice President's busy schedule of meetings did not permit Bhaktivedanta Swami to answer fully. For the Vice President, the interview was a gesture of appreciation, recognizing the Swami for his work on behalf of India's Hindu cultural heritage. And Bhaktivedanta Swami humbly accepted the ritual. Later, however, this is Prabhupada, typical Prabhupada. It's not that he was just interested in just, using someone to promote his book, but he's interested in the person himself. This is how Prabhupada was. He was not just interested in whoever helps, okay, let him help. But rather he was interested in that person who's helping also to become Krishna conscious. Later, however, he wrote Dr. Hussain a long letter answering the question he had not time to answer during their brief meeting. Muslims also admit, he wrote, that there is nothing greater than Allah. The Christians also admit that God is great. The human society must learn to obey the laws of God. He reminded Dr. Hussain of India's great cultural asset, the Vedic literature. The Indian government could perform the best welfare work for humanity by disseminating Vedic knowledge in a systematic way. Srimad Bhagavatam was produced in India. It was a substantial contribution India could offer to the world. Best welfare work for humanity, as Prabhupada says. In March of 1964, Krishna Pandit, Bhaktivedanta Swami's sponsor at the Radha Krishna temple in Chippiwada, arranged for him to reside for a few months at the Sri Radha Vallabhaji temple in the nearby Rosanpura Naisarak neighborhood. There he could continue his writing and publishing, but he would also be giving a series of lectures. That is not possible in the Chippiwada temple, a small temple, and people would not gather there easily. So now Prabhupada got the facility to also give a series of lectures. Krishna Pandit provided Bhaktivedanta Swami about 1,500 rupees for his maintenance. On Bhaktivedanta Swami's arrival at Sri Radha Vallabhaji temple, the manager distributed notices inviting people to take full advantage of the presence of a Vaishnava sadhu. As resident Acharya, Bhaktivedanta Swami held morning and evening discourses at the temple without reducing his activities of writing and printing. Then he meets the Prime Minister of India. In June, Bhaktivedanta Swami got the opportunity to meet Prime Minister Lal Bahadur Shastri. The meeting had been arranged by Doladram Khanna, a wealthy jeweler who was a trustee of the Chippiwada temple and had often met with Bhaktivedanta Swami there. An old friend of Prime Minister Shastri since his youth, when they had attended the same yoga club, Mr. Khanna arranged the meeting as a favor to Bhaktivedanta Swami. Let the Prime Minister meet a genuine sadhu, Mr. Khanna thought. It was a formal occasion in the gardens of the Parliament building, and the Prime Minister was meeting a number of guests. Prime Minister Shastri, dressed in white kurta and dhoti and a Nehru hat and surrounded by aides, received the elderly sadhu. Bhaktivedanta Swami, looking scholarly in his spectacles, stepped forward and introduced himself and his book, Srimad Bhagavatam. As he handed the Prime Minister a copy of Volume 1, a photographer snapped a photo of the author and the Prime Minister smiling over the book. The next day, Bhaktivedanta Swami wrote to Prime Minister Shastri. He soon received a reply personally signed by the Prime Minister. Dear Swamiji, many thanks for your letter. I'm indeed grateful to you for presenting a copy of Srimad Bhagavatam to me. I do realize that you're doing valuable work. It would be good if the libraries and the government institutions purchase copies of this book. So previously, all these things would happen easily. Libraries, the government institution. Today, in the name of secular, so many places they don't accept to keep these books. Bhaktivedanta Swami wrote back to the Prime Minister requesting him to buy books for Indian institutions. Mr. R.K. Sharma of the Ministry of Education subsequently wrote back, confirming that they would take 50 copies of Volume 2, just as they had taken Volume 1. For those of you who do not know the history of India, Prime Minister Lal Bahadur Shastri, not very soon after, sometime after he met Prabhupada, he actually died of heart attack during a visit to Russia in a place called, visit to USSR, in a place called Tashkent. So, but his meeting with Prabhupada happened before that, and he was very fortunate to have met Srila Prabhupada. Okay, so today we come, so then we come to the concluding portion of today's session, working on Volume 3. Now, what you can please notice, what humility Prabhupada had. It's something outstanding that really comes out in all its glory here. To concentrate on completing Volume 3, Bhaktivedanta Swami returned to the Radha Damodar temple. These were the last chapters of the first canto, dealing with the advent of the present age of Kali. There were many verses foretelling society's degradation, narrating how the great King Parikshit had staved off Kali's influence by his strong Krishna conscious rule. In his purports, Bhaktivedanta Swami wrote that government could not check corruption unless it rooted out the 4 basic principles of irreligion. So this is something that we need to be clear about. Prabhupada is very clearly saying this. You cannot expect any corruption to vanish by some stopgap measures, the so-called lofty ideas. But wrote that government could not check corruption unless it rooted out the 4 basic principles of religion: meat eating, illicit sex, intoxication, and gambling. You cannot check all these evils of society simply by statutory acts of police vigilance. But you have to cure the disease of mind by the proper medicine, namely advocating the principles of Brahminical culture or the principles of austerity, cleanliness, mercy, and truthfulness. We must always remember that false pride, undue attachment for women or association with them, an intoxicating habit of all description will cripple the human civilization from the path of factual peace. However, the people may go on clamoring for such peace of the world. To raise funds for Volume 3, Srila Prabhupada, to raise funds for Volume 3, Bhaktivedanta Swami decided to try Bombay. He traveled there in July and stayed at the Prem Kutir Dharmashala, a free ashram. Srila Prabhupada. At Prem Kutir, they received me very nicely. I was going to sell my books. Some of them were criticizing. What kind of sannyasi? He's making business book selling. Not the authorities said that, but some of them. I was writing my book then also. Then I became a guest for 15 days with a member of the Dalmia family. One of the brothers told me that he wanted to construct a little cottage at his house. You can live here. I will give you a nice cottage. I thought, no, it is not good to be fully dependent and patronized by a Vishayi materialist. But I stayed for 15 days and he gave me exclusive use of a typewriter for writing my books. This is the nature of a sannyasi or sadhu. No matter whether they have a rich disciple or a follower or admirer, they don't agree to stay there for a long time. Bhaktivedanta Swami made his rounds of the institutions and booksellers in Bombay. He now had an advertisement showing himself with Prime Minister Shastri. And he also had the Prime Minister's letter and the Ministry of Education's purchase order for 50 volumes, still he was getting only small orders. So there was good advertisement. The fact that he was the Prime Minister Shastri, Prime Minister of the country, he had the Prime Minister's letter, the Ministry of Education's purchase order for 50 volumes, not ordinary. Still he was getting only small orders. Then he decided to visit Sumati Morarji, head of the Scindia Steamship Company. He had heard from his godbrothers in Bombay that she was known for helping sadhus and had donated to the Bombay Gaudiya Mutt. He had never met her, but he well remembered the 1958 promise by one of her officers to arrange half-fare passage for him to America. Now he wanted her help for printing Srimad Bhagavatam. Now the same person, if you remember, when Mr. Nakano had invited him to the Japan conference, so he told Mr. Nakano that he wrote to the same donor that you had agreed to arrange a half-fare passage for me to America. So a round trip to Japan will cost less than half the fare to America. So can you sponsor this? But somehow he did not sponsor, and Prabhupada took it as Krishna's will. What can be done? Now he wanted her help, Srimati Maharaj's help for printing Srimad Bhagavatam. Now that promise of the half-fare passage was done by one of Srimati Maharaj's officers. But his first attempts to arrange a meeting were unsuccessful. Frustrated at being put off by Mrs. Murarji's officers, he sat down on the front steps of her office building. Notice this. Frustrated at being put off by Mrs. Murarji's officers, he sat down on the front steps of her office building, determined to catch her attention as he left for the day. The lone sadhu certainly caused some attention as he sat quietly chanting for 5 hours on the steps of the Scindia Steamship Company building. So today, if that building exists, and if we happen to visit the steps, we should offer our obeisances to those steps where Srila Prabhupada sat for 5 hours, chanting, trying to get Mrs. Sumati Morarji's to sponsor the 3rd volume of Srimad Bhagavatam. So that those steps are also a holy place for the followers of His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Finally, late that afternoon, Mrs. Morarji emerged in a flurry of business talk with her secretary, Mr. Chokshi. Upon seeing Bhaktivedanta Swami, she stopped. "Who is this gentleman sitting here?" she asked Mr. Chokshi. "He has been here for 5 hours, the secretary said. "All right, I'll come," she said, and walked up to where Bhaktivedanta Swami was sitting. He smiled and stood, offering namaskaras with his folded palms. "Swamiji, what can I do for you?" she said. Bhaktivedanta Swami told her briefly of his intentions to print the 3rd volume of Srimad Bhagavatam. "I want you to help me," he said. "All right," Mrs. Murarji replied. "We can meet tomorrow because it is getting late. Tomorrow you can come and we will discuss." The next day, Bhaktivedanta Swami met with Mrs. Murarji in her office, where she looked at the typed manuscript and the published volumes. "All right," she said. "If you want to print it, I will give you the aid. Whatever you want, you can get it printed." Very saintly lady. With Mrs. Morarji's guarantee, Bhaktivedanta Swami was free to return to Vrindavan to finish writing the manuscript. As with the previous volumes, he set a demanding schedule for writing and publishing. The 3rd volume would complete the 1st canto. Then, with a supply of impressive literature, he would be ready to go to the West. Even with volumes 1 and 2, he was getting better reception in India. Already he had seen the Vice President and the Prime Minister. He had successfully approached a big business magnate of Bombay, and within a few minutes of presenting the book, he had received a large donation. The books were powerful preaching. Okay, so on that note, I'll stop here for today's session. We'll take some questions or comments. Just give me one more few minutes break to just drink some more water. Are there any questions or comments? Shailesh Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, Dandavat Pranams, Prabhupada. Wonderful having you back again. Thank you for the nectar. It was a wonderful nectarian class. So much there. Just a quick question, slightly unrelated but related. So Srila Prabhupada came to the West with certain volumes of the Bhagavatam. It is this version, print version that he had, which was then subsequently stolen or lost. Is that correct?
No, that is not this. When I mean, what incident are you referring to? Lost when?
He had some books that were lost in the New York flat. They were stolen by the
Yeah. I mean, that's, yeah, but I mean, there are only few, not all of them. Yes.
But it was this print version that he came.
Yeah, definitely.
And because he then had to restart by writing from scratch again. Yes.
No. I don't recollect the books being stolen. I remember his typewriter and other things being stolen. But I'll have to look up that section in specifically. I don't recollect the books being stolen, even if the books were stolen, but not all of them were. He already distributed a lot of them. So the idea that he had to start from scratch, that did not happen at all, actually.
Okay, because I seem to have heard that, or somehow recollected. I may be completely wrong, so apologies.
Yeah, no, he did not have to start from scratch. But that is the Bhagavad Gita which got stolen while he was in India.
Yes, of course, yes.
That got stolen. That the entire manuscript got stolen. Then what he did was a new edition of the Bhagavad Gita, entirely new edition. That he had to start from scratch. But Bhagavatam, no. Now, whether some copies got stolen in this thing, I'll just look that up. And anyway, we're going to deal with that soon. But from my recollection, the books were not stolen, mainly the typewriter and other things.
Okay, thank you, Prabhu. That's all I had.
Shashi Rupa Lalita Mataji.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, accept my humble obeisance.
There's some 1 minute. I must see. Some problem with the volume, can't hear.
Hare Krishna.
Not just you, Mataji. I'm not even able to hear. Not even Shailesh Prabhu. I could barely hear him. So just give me a second. Just set the volume button here properly or something. Just give me a second. What's that? Can you speak now, Mataji?
Yes, Prabhu. Hare Krishna Prabhu. Pranam.
Yes, I can hear you now. Okay, thanks.
Prabhu, as it is mentioned, Prabhupada has also mentioned in the preface part that even if one person get liberated, then he will consider the mission successful. I have text that most of the people who are in this material world are all Nitya Baddhas. Then does it mean that those who are practicing Krishna consciousness, it's very hard to be liberated in this one lifetime?
Prabhupada, this first one doesn't speak about liberated. It writes in the Bhagavad Gita, even if one person becomes a pure devotee of the Lord, which means to attain love of God. When he refers to pure devotee, he's talking about someone who has attained Krishna Prema. Yes, Krishna Prema is the rarest thing in the world. The beautiful thing about it is that Lord Caitanya made it freely available. So even one person attaining love of God, it is an extraordinary achievement in terms of, it's not an easy thing to attain love of God, because people practice spiritual life for millions of births to come to the platform of bhakti. So somehow we have been given this bhakti freely without any qualification. On top of that, if someone attains love of God, it is a very rare achievement. But so Prabhupada is talking about trying to make this point that even if one person becomes a pure devotee, it's a big achievement. Of course, it's not that only one person can become. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mercy is that many people can become, but even one person is a big achievement. It's not something to be underestimated. That is the point that Prabhupada is trying to make. Yeah.
Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you so much.
Something on chat. Thank you, Mataji. Thank you very much for the nice connections. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mataji. Okay. So if there are no more questions, then we can stop for today. We'll resume next week. Next week, I'm planning to finish this. Yes, Prabhu. Somebody wants to.
Yeah, Prabhuji, what about the today is like the collective, whatever we are doing every week, whenever we this one, what is
You want a summary? Summary.
Yes,
Summary.
yes.
Okay. Okay. Just give me a second. I mean, for me, when I read through this section, what really stood out was the fact that Prabhupada is unhesitant to do anything that it takes to serve as Guru Maharaj. He's not giving any excuses whatsoever. He's not thinking, oh, I don't have this facility, I don't have that facility. Oh, if I were to have this, I could have done it better. If I were to have this, I mean, there is no excuses to serve the mission of the spiritual master. Under all circumstances, he remains determined. You know, he's not giving any, not only that, already his life is difficult. On top of that, he's willing to make his life even more difficult to meet the demands of urgency. You know, so already this whole thing is a big endeavor to be staying alone, getting it printed. Then his printing supervisor, Hitasharan Sharma, he even gives up his printing supervisor simply because the urgency to spread Krishna consciousness to the whole world. So there are two things that are characteristics in the life of Prabhupada, Bhakti, and our acharyas. One is that, and followers of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. One is that they want to glorify Krishna unlimitedly. And the other is that they want to do whatever it takes to save the conditioned souls of this world. They can go to any extent to save the conditioned souls of this world. There's nothing which stops them. Nothing can stop them from their endeavor to save the conditioned soul of this world. So their interest in glorifying Krishna unlimitedly and also in saving the conditioned souls of this world. So there is no nothing that they're unwilling to do. Everything they're willing to do for the sake of, and if it's already burdensome, they're willing to increase that burden also. So they remain focused on that path of trying to save the conditioned souls. That's why we have to also be careful. We have to realize that Krishna consciousness is not just about practicing Krishna consciousness very nicely in our own lives. We should have that spirit of if we feel any gratitude towards Srila Prabhupada, we should have that. We should be able to help him to spread the mission. Spreading does not mean somehow or the other make it spread. Like Prabhupada said, if you keep adding water to milk, after some time it'll become water, not milk anymore. So we're not interested in just randomly spreading, but we're interested in actually focusing and spending time and making it work for people. Okay, you chant Hare Krishna and then say, okay, Prabhu, I've made so many devotees. When you say make so many devotees, when it says Vaishnava is a Chintamani, that means that not that, okay, so many people are chanting Hare Krishna, but so many people are progressing on the path of attaining love of God. That is a sign of a real Vaishnava. So we should try to, there's no excuse that we should ever think of when it comes to executing the mission of Prabhupada, whether we are sick, not sick, whether we have facilities, no facilities. Under all conditions of life, we should think of two things. The acharyas have tried to glorify Krishna unlimitedly. Let me try to hear that glorification and become well situated in that Krishna consciousness. And let me try to help them in their mission to serve the conditioned souls, no matter what condition of life I may be. And of course, since I mentioned this, I just want to mention one incident. In the year 15, sorry. His Holiness Jayapatak Maharaj had a medical emergency, and he was admitted. We had to airlift him with an air ambulance to Delhi, and he was admitted in the hospital in the ICU. So I remember when I went into the ICU, and then Japatak Maharaj looked at me. He was full of tubes, and he was showing something to me with his hands towards the table. There's a side table near him, and the side table had so many medications, and there's a nurse standing there writing something, you know. So then I thought maybe he wants the nurse. So there are different bottles. So I shut, because he had a ventilator, he couldn't speak. So I was trying to point out that medicines, different things, you know. Do you want this? He said no. Do you want that? And finally, he got frustrated, and he just, with his head, he said no. Then he took there's an alphabet chart for those who cannot speak because of ventilator. So he took the alphabet chart, and then he told me, please make the nurse chant Hare Krishna. So that was the instruction. So he was actually pointing to the nurse there in that hospital and asking me, please make her chant Hare Krishna. So this is the nature of the great devotees. This is the nature of those who are absorbed in the mission of the spiritual master. So even in an ICU with so many tubes and in the most uncomfortable situation, I could see that Japatak Maharaj asking me, ask that nurse to chant Hare Krishna, you know. So this is something we should never forget, that in any condition of life, we should not only chant. Of course, he had a clicker and he was chanting in his left hand with the clicker. Right hand was full of tubes. And then he was also pointing me to preach to that lady. So I could see this in action. And not only with him, but I've seen with so many great devotees that they're always thinking of two things: how to expand, how to always hear Krishna Katha, be absorbed in Krishna consciousness and the association of devotees, and how to spread this Krishna conscious movement. So that's something which we can learn from this chapter, that under all circumstances, Prabhupada is very clear. He wants to say the condition that he will not be discouraged by any obstacle. Not only that, he's willing to take as much burden as possible to do it urgently also. Is that okay? Leela Madhuri, Lalita Mataji.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. Thank you so much for your class. Just for my clarification, I wanted to know this. By reading Bhagavatam, we hear that Kunti Maharani was praying for more problems. Prahlad Maharaj bearing all the things, whatever his father was doing. Even as you said just now, His Holiness Jayapataka Goswami Maharaj telling the nurse, telling you to teach Hare Krishna mantra to the nurse when he was in that condition. But all these devotees are exalted devotees. But when some disturbances happens, especially in my life, I take a break just to strengthen myself. I read more Bhagavatam or hear more, just to when I get so many questions in my mind, I try to get answers either from reading or hearing by taking a break from my routine preaching activities. Is it right or not? Because sometimes I do it, but sometimes I get that guilty feeling also, that as you said, that whether we are sick or not, we have to continue to do our contribution in this preaching moment.
You're not taking a break to watch a movie or go on a holiday, you know, to Thailand or something. So that's fine, because you're doing it to improve your Krishna consciousness. So you're not abandoning your responsibility. You're trying to do the needful to enable you to perform your responsibilities nicely. That's what you're doing. So there's nothing wrong in that. If you take a break to watch a movie or take off to some vacation spot to just take a break from Krishna consciousness, that is something that's problematic. But to take shelter of the Bhagavatam is definitely perfectly fine.
Okay. Thank you so much, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
So I think we'll stop for today. Resume next Sunday. And next Sunday we'll finish first volume of Leelamrita. So at the end of next class, I'll also share all the presentations that I'd made for this first volume. So I'll post it on both the WhatsApp group and on the Telegram group. Okay, thank you very much. Panchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhu devicha paritanam pavanebhyo vaishnavibhyo namo.